So let's go on to the next event on our list. We're coming along very, very nicely with these events. And this one, it's time to advise a supplier of a bad test result. You remember that one of the issues was that we really should tell the supplier when we get bad test results so they can take corrective action on their end. So I'm going to draw the bubble again. I'm going to leave it unlabeled. And the first question we ask is, how do we know that it's time to tell a supplier of a bad test result? Well, we know because we get a bad test result. So I'm going to put the test result here. Remember the test result that we got before from the testing? I'm going to put the test result there. And of course, I have to associate that test result with an organ as well. So what have I got here so far? I've got liver positive on Tuesday at 9 o'clock. We're not there yet. We need more information. We need to know the test type that, or the type of test that we ran. So now we know liver, hepatitis C, if that's possible. I don't really know that, but it's a good example anyway. And here we have the result here of that test. So now that we know what we're dealing with, we can send that result off to the supplier. So I'll put the supplier outside our system here. I'll send the result to the supplier. And we're only interested in sending them bad test results. And of course, to be able to do that, we have to have supplier information. So I'll have the supplier object here, which gives us their contact information. And of course, the last question is always, what do we want to remember or record about what we've done? Do we want to keep track of the fact, or keep track means to record or remember, or do we want to keep track of the fact that we have told the supplier that they sent us a bad liver? And the answer is yes, we have to keep track of it. Now remember, rule number one, we got to attribute that data somewhere then. Rule number one says attribute the data item to the object it best describes and to no other object. So do we make that part of supplier or do we make it part of organ? Well, if we make it part of supplier, then we're saying date and time supplier advised of bad test result. So it'll say September the 12th, but we don't know anything about it in terms of connecting it to an organ. So I think we're going to connect it to, and here I'm going to create a divergent data flow here, like that, and I'm going to add a data attribute for date and time supplier advised of bad test result. Now that's a long name, but you know, from a business perspective, that's understandable. I don't want to have some kind of an acronym or something with a bunch of hyphens or underscores there, because the clients don't really understand why I would be doing that. So I'm just going to call it what it is, date and time the supplier's advised of a bad test result. So I'm going to keep track of that here. So now I have everything I need, and I can write the narrative. So find the test results for the tests that were conducted for a specific organ and tell the supplier, and we get the supplier information here, tell the supplier of that bad test result and keep track of the fact that we told the supplier. There's our narrative right there. Okay, so it's time to advise the supplier of a bad test result, and I'm going to put advise supplier of bad test result. So there's the narrative, we have some objects, a new data attribute, we have all the data that we need to be able to tell the supplier. And we're able to write it out very nicely. The only thing missing now so far is the business rules table, which we'll get to in just 1 minute. But I want you to look back here for a moment. Here it says it's time to test an organ for disease. We could have included this into this process. And we could have just stacked the events. We could have had one event that says it's time to test an organ for disease, and we could have had, for the same process, we could have had it's time to advise the supplier of a bad test result. Then we could have added, because we have organ over there and here, we have test result here and over there, we have test here and there, so I'd need to add supplier. If I add supplier, and I'm just going to show you what happens here by putting it here, and I'd have to put it here as well. And I'd have my dialogue there. But I also have to expand my table with supplier as well, like that. Now, could I put it here? Yes, I could. But I prefer to partition it and separate it. Because remember that the first rule of all rules is partition the effort to minimize complexity. In other words, break things up into as small a piece as possible so as we can fit it in here. If I put all of that stuff in here with an expanded table, I'm increasing complexity, not decreasing it. So by not having all that in here, but having it separate instead, I've minimized the complexity and I've added clarity at that point. So try, whenever possible, to partition rather than to expand the complexity. We're going to go right on with the business rules tables right after this break for a commercial.